What is a breakaway? You might have to bear with me here, as it's not that easy to define. The simple answer is that a breakaway is a rider or group of riders that are in front of the main peloton. Confusingly, when Pogačar attacked with 80 k's to go in Strade Bianche this year, that's not seen as a breakaway, but rather an attack. Now, we generally look at breakaways as being the group of riders that heads up the road in the first part of a race or stage. There are lots of different permutations of breakaways. So on sprint days, for example, you generally have far fewer riders and teams looking to get themselves up the road. That is for the simple reason that sprint days are generally much flatter, making them far easier to control by the bunch behind. Even the individual might of a Mathieu van der Poel or a Wout van Aert would not be enough to stay ahead of a collection of riders from sprint teams chasing you and trying to bring you back. Now, a good example of that was this year's stage 13 of the Giro. Everybody knew that day that the likes of Lidl-Trek and Soudal-QuickStep would do everything they could to ensure a bunch sprint, so very few riders wanted to be on a hiding to nothing. In the end, we had two riders from VF Group Bardiani, one from Polti Cometa, forming the break of the day. Why did they go up the road? Well, basically, for the television exposure for their sponsors, really important as two smaller budget teams, plus the points and prizes to be gained at the intermediate sprint points. It's not that they had no chance of staying away, but I'd say it was probably less than 1%. In non-sprint stages, the chances of staying away are far greater. Why? Because the teams interested in riding for a good result on GC are not always intent on bringing the break back for the finish to set their rider up for a stage win. That takes a lot of energy, and so sometimes it's better to save that energy for deeper into a Grand Tour. On those hillier and mountainous stages, the fight to make it into the break is always fraught. Most teams will want to be in it, and so if they miss it, they will sometimes chase behind to bring it close enough to jump across to. Even more confusingly, sometimes you do have a rider in it, but it's the wrong one. Stage 15 is a really good example of this. Cofidis had Harrison Wood in the break, but they wanted Simon Geschke there to give him a chance of sweeping up the mountain points en route. They chased to the foot of the first big climb, after which Geschke, along with about 40 others, formed a new breakaway that eventually bridged to the front of the race. There are all sorts of reasons beyond the chance of stage victory why riders would want to get up the road in a breakaway. It might be for the mountains points, it might be for the sprint points, it could even be to maintain or improve your position in the team's classification, or it could be to improve your position on GC yourself. And that's where the game of chess on wheels really starts. So the leader of the mountains classification may not want the rider in second or third place to be up the road, same goes for the points. That could mean marking them out yourself or getting your team to chase them down. And the same goes for GC. Tijmen Arensman at this Giro is a good example. He's not really a threat to Pogačar or UAE, he's over 11 minutes down, but he is a threat to Antonio Tiberi's 5th place overall and best young riders classification. Likewise, Romain Bardet, 8th on GC, almost 13 minutes down on Pogačar. But if he gets just a few minutes up the road, he'll be threatening the positions of Arensman, Tiberi and O'Connor. So very quickly, you have 3 teams not happy with that situation. Now, if we move on to today's profile, you'll find one that is tough, but not really tough enough for any major changes on GC. As such, I reckon about 80% of the peloton will want to get themselves into the breakaway. Now, unfortunately for the climbers, the first half of today's stage is predominantly flat, so they can't use their climbing prowess to ensure they get up the road. And this is where it becomes a real lottery. Do too much at the start, and you'll pay for it at the end. Do too little, and you might miss the breakaway altogether. And that is why we think the start of today's stage is going to be so fascinating.